A Waverly Hills sanatorium. High atop the hills of Kentucky, where thick fog slithers in every night like a living entity, stands Waverly Hills Sanatorium, towering with an eerie presence. Built in the early 20th century as a tuberculosis treatment center, it quickly became a place of pain and suffering. They called it the Last Stop. A grim nickname for a hospital where thousands entered but never left, at least not alive. The only way out was through the death tunnel. The disease was merciless, incurable at the time, and the wards filled each day with patients whose bodies were slowly consumed. Doctors tried everything, radical surgeries, experimental treatments, but they knew that most who entered the hospital would never walk out. Behind these thick walls, death was an ever-present guest, and the building never forgot the souls that perished within it. As the years passed, staff members began to witness strange occurrences. Whispers echoed from empty rooms, windows creaked open on their own despite being locked shut, and heavy footsteps resonated through the long hallways where no one was present. Some nurses swore they saw shadowy figures darting between corridors, while others reported feeling cold breaths against their necks, as if someone unseen was standing just behind them. But nothing compared to what happened in Bistio, room 502. One morning, a young nurse was found hanging from the ceiling of that very room. Some said she had been pregnant with an illegitimate child. Others whispered that she had been a victim of a sinister experiment gone wrong. No one ever learned the full truth. And it wasn't the last tragedy. A few years later, a doctor plunged from the same room's window, but as his body fell to the ground, his shadow reportedly remained standing at the window for a few seconds, staring down as if he had never really left. When the hospital finally shut down in the 1960s, it became a ghost town, both literally and figuratively. Reports flooded in, voices drifting from the 5th floor, children's laughter echoing through the empty halls, and apparitions of long-dead patients wandering the corridors as if time had never moved forward. But the most terrifying phenomena happened in Tafauti, the death tunnel. This long underground passage, once used to discreetly transport bodies out of the hospital, became something far more sinister. Those who dared enter it reported feeling cold hands brushing against them in the darkness. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving slowly, as if still searching for an escape from their doomed fate decades ago. One fateful night, a team of paranormal investigators decided to spend the night inside the sanatorium, focusing on the infamous 4th floor, known as the most active area. At midnight, while recording their surroundings, their cameras captured a dark silhouette walking down the hallway. It wasn't a reflection or a trick of the light. It moved with intention, its footsteps clearly audible on the decayed floor. When one of the investigators stepped forward, the shadow Shaigid froze for a brief moment, then sprinted at an impossible speed before vanishing behind a door. But when they opened the door, there was nothing inside, only an empty, abandoned room. Today, Waverly Hills Sanatorium is considered one of the most haunted places in the world. Visitors who have braved its corridors tell chilling tales. Some swear they heard the anguished moans of former patients, while others have seen a stinky nurse in a white uniform standing by a 5th floor window before fading into nothingness. No matter how skeptics try to dismiss the legends, everyone who has stepped inside agrees on one thing. The patients never truly left, and the building is still alive, but no longer for the living. The Curse of the Bell Witch. Deep in the heart of Tennessee, where vast farms stretch beneath the watchful embrace of dense forests, the Bell family home stood isolated from the world. It was surrounded by an eerie stillness, a quiet so perfect it felt unnatural, as if it were merely a veil hiding something far more sinister. For years the Bell family lived in peace, unaware that their lives were about to become the center of one of the most terrifying hauntings in American history. At first the disturbances were small, faint knocks on the walls, hushed whispers that barely reached the ear in the dead of night, objects shifting inexplicably. Shadows flitted past their vision, vanishing the moment they tried to focus on them. But these were only the beginning. One night, as the family prepared for sleep, a soft, feminine laugh echoed through the house. It was distant, yet laced with a cruel amusement. The family froze. There was no one else in the house, and yet the laughter had come from somewhere nearby. As the days passed, the voice began to speak. It called them by name, whispered in their ears while they slept, murmuring cryptic phrases, its presence growing bolder with every passing night. John Bell, the father, suffered the most. At first, it was subtle, a chilling touch on his shoulder when no one was there, unseen hands striking his legs as he lay in bed, whispers circling around him like a predator toying with its prey. But then, on a night colder than most, the entity revealed itself fully. John awoke unable to move. A crushing force held him in place, his breath shallow and labored. Then right beside his ear, a rasping voice spoke, its words sharp as ice. "I am the witch, Kate, and I will not leave until you are destroyed." A wave of terror swept through his body, but he was powerless. He felt something pressing against his chest, an invisible presence suffocating him. Only when he forced himself to move did the paralysis break, and he leaped from his bed, gasping. The room was empty, unchanged, but the feeling of unseen eyes watching him did not fade. From that night on, the house became a battleground. Doors slammed shut with violent force. Furniture was thrown across rooms by an invisible hand. Mirrors reflected faces that did not belong to anyone in the house. The entity did not remain a shadow. It wanted them to know it was real. John's youngest daughter, Betsy Bell, became the next target. She woke screaming on multiple occasions, crying that unseen hands had yanked her hair, that something had struck her face while she slept. In the mornings, her family found fresh bruises and scratches on her arms, marks from something they could not see. She begged her parents to leave, but they had nowhere to go. The terror spread beyond the house. The local schoolteacher who had attempted to help Betsy reported hearing a voice sneering behind him. "No one can save her?" As time passed, the voice grew stronger. It no longer whispered. It mocked, laughed, and taunted anyone who dared challenge it. John Bell's health deteriorated at an alarming rate. His face grew pale, his body frail, as if something unseen was draining his life away. He suffered relentless coughing fits, saw shadows moving in the corners of his vision, heard his own name called out when no one was around. In the early hours of one winter morning, the family found him dead in his bed. Beside him, on a small wooden table, was a bottle filled with a dark, viscous liquid. One of the household servants, curious, uncorked the bottle to smell its contents, but before he could, a shrill burst of laughter filled the room. The voice cackled triumphant before hissing, "I poisoned him myself. No one can stop me." For a brief time after John's death, the house fell silent. But the curse was not broken. On some nights, the family heard a deep, sorrowful moan coming from the walls, as if the house itself mourned its lost victim. And on the night they finally left the property for good, a chilling voice whispered one final message. I will remain here, waiting for the next ones. To this day, the Bell Witch House remains one of the most haunted places in America. Those who dare to visit claim to see shadows drifting behind the windows, to hear on whispers urging them to leave. And sometimes, on the stillest of nights, they hear that same laughter, faint but full of cruel amusement, just as if Kate never left. The Amityville Horror. On a cold night in 1974, Ronald DeFeo woke up to whispers he had never heard before, voices that did not belong to his family. His words cut through the silence of the dark, asking who was there, but there was no answer. Only the shadow in his window moved, not in sync with his own reflection. The whispers grew louder in his head, low but commanding, not a request, but an order, carrying the promise that everything would end tonight. At midnight, he got out of bed, reaching for the rifle beside his dresser. He wasn't thinking, not with his own mind at least. He walked down the long hallway of the Amityville house, heading first to his parents' room. He opened the door slowly, watching their sleeping figures under the dim streetlight streaming through the window. Without hesitation, he raised the rifle and pulled the trigger. There were no screams, no struggle, as if something had kept them asleep until the very last moment. One by one, he moved through the house. His siblings, his little sister. None of them woke up, none of them ran. As if the house itself had ensured they wouldn't escape. By the time the police arrived the next morning, Ronald was sitting in the living room, staring at the lifeless bodies lined up in neat rows. The officer's eyes widened in horror, not just because of the massacre, but because of the unnatural silence inside the house, as if it was watching them. When they asked Ronald why he did it, he lifted his head calmly and whispered, "The voices told me to." A year after the incident, the house stood empty, silent but not abandoned. Something inside it still lived, waiting for its next occupants. The Lutz family didn't know the full story. They had heard about the crime but dismissed it as a tragic past, unable to resist the shockingly low price of the grand riverside home. At first, everything seemed normal. Then the little things began to change. George Lutz woke up at exactly 3:15 a.m. every night, the same time the DeFeo murders had occurred. A strange odor filled certain rooms, a mix of sulfur and stagnant water, but they could never find the source. Unseen footsteps creaked through the hallways, whispers echoed in the corners, speaking in voices that didn't belong to anyone in the house. Their daughter, Missy, started speaking to someone they couldn't see. She called her new friend Jody, a little girl with glowing red eyes, who visited her every night. When asked what she looked like, Missy described her as a girl in white, but her feet never touched the floor. One night, George woke up to a loud crash downstairs. Grabbing a flashlight, he descended the stairs to find all the chairs flipped upside down and the kitchen table lying on its side. A suffocating chill filled the air, pressing against his skin as though unseen eyes were watching him. The following night, while they slept, a door slammed shut. Somewhere in the house, George rushed out of bed and saw a shadow moving at the end of the hallway. But when he approached, there was nothing there. In his daughter's room, he found the window wide open, even though they had locked it before bed. A week later, the walls started marking themselves. Every morning, they found strange carvings in the wood, some in unknown symbols, but one night, the message was clear. Get out now. In their final night in the house, the entire family woke up to screaming from downstairs. George ran to the kitchen and froze. In the dim light, something tall with glowing red eyes stood in the corner, watching him. Its body was human-like, but its face was a dark void. He couldn't move for a moment before he turned and ran upstairs, shaking his wife awake, grabbing their children and fleeing the house. They left everything behind and never returned. Since that night, no one has lived in the house for long. Every new resident lasted only a few weeks before fleeing without explanation. Today, the house still stands, but it is no longer the same. The facade has been altered to discourage curious visitors, but some say that when they pass by, they can see shadows moving behind the windows and hear a distant laughter from within, waiting for someone new to move in, even if just for a little while. The Stanley Hotel. Deep in the heart of Colorado, nestled among mist-covered mountains, stands the Stanley Hotel, a grand and elegant structure that hides one of the most chilling haunted tales in history. From the outside, it appears to be a masterpiece of classic architecture, but within its walls lurk stories that would send shivers down the spine of even the bravest visitors. This hotel is not just a luxurious retreat, it is a gateway to something beyond human comprehension. When Stephen King first visited the Stanley Hotel, he had no idea that he was about to experience one of the most terrifying nights of his life. He arrived in late autumn when the hotel was nearly empty. The rooms were vacant, the hallways stretched endlessly in eerie silence, and an unsettling stillness hung in the air. He did not yet realize that this night would change his life forever. At first, everything seemed normal, but at midnight, he awoke in a panic, his heart pounding as if trapped in a waking nightmare. He sat up and scanned the room. It looked the same, yet the air felt unnaturally cold, a chill that was unlike anything he had ever known. Then faint laughter echoed through the corridors, distant yet deeply unsettling. When he opened his door, the hallway before him was completely empty, but the wooden floor beneath his feet trembled slightly as if something unseen had just run past him. Shaken, he returned to bed, trying to dismiss it as his imagination. But then images flooded his mind. He saw a small child running through the halls, a woman in old-fashioned clothing standing by a window. And when he glanced at the mirror across from his bed, he saw more than just his own reflection. Behind him stood a shadowy figure, silent and watching. By morning, he left the hotel in a hurry, but he could never forget what he had experienced. That night became the inspiration for his legendary horror novel. The Shining. One of the most terrifying stories ever written, but his was not the only encounter. Over the years, countless guests have shared eerie experiences. Room 217 is perhaps the most infamous. It is said to be haunted by the spirit of Elizabeth Wilson, a former housekeeper. Guests staying in the room have reported waking up to find their belongings neatly rearranged, the lights flickering on and off, and at times a cold hand gently touching their foreheads, as if someone were checking on them in the night. The hallways are another story entirely. Many visitors have sworn that they saw a small boy running through the corridors, only for him to vanish when they got closer. Others have reported hearing the sound of a piano playing in the ballroom. Late at night, despite the room being locked. When staff members entered to investigate, they found the piano still and silent, but its lid was mysteriously open, as if someone had been playing it just moments before. The fourth floor is by far the most haunted. Once used as the servants' quarters, it is now a hotspot for paranormal activity. Strange whispers, children's laughter in the dead of night, and heavy footsteps pacing the hallways have all been reported. Some guests claim to have had their blankets pulled off while they slept, while others say they saw a tall man in a long black coat standing at the end of the hallway, watching before fading into the shadows. Even the hotel staff have had their share of experiences. One night, a skeptical night guard decided to patrol the hotel alone after midnight. As he reached the grand ballroom, he heard faint laughter and hushed whispers. When he turned, he saw the ballroom doors slowly closing by themselves. Gathering his courage, he stepped forward and pushed them open, only to find an empty, silent room. But he swore he could feel unseen eyes watching him from within. Today, the Stanley Hotel is considered one of the most haunted places in America and a must-visit destination for paranormal enthusiasts. The visitors who come here are not just thrill seekers, they are those in search of answers, those who dare to face the unknown and listen to the voices of the past trapped within its walls. Some leave with no experiences to tell, while others depart carrying stories that make sleeping at night nearly impossible. No matter how much skeptics try to deny it, one thing is certain. The Stanley Hotel is not just a place to stay. It is a portal to another world, where old spirits still whisper in the halls, searching for someone to listen or someone to join them.